Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Jared Hamilton on, and I am pretty much obsessed with his mindset around the way that he approaches food and weight loss and getting to your dream body, which is the issue that most people have. They think it's about a dream body. But as you all know, I always say body image is never about the body, never has been. Because I was looking back at photos, as you heard me talk about on the last podcast, where I was looking freaking the best I ever had. And this was years ago. But because my mindset was in such a shitty place, I actually ended up looking worse and worse and worse over the years. And that's what made me realize that it really never is about the body. I mean, you can feel amazing about yourself one day, and then all of a sudden, something in your life is out of control, or something triggers you from the past, whatever it is, and now you're beating up on your body because there's a lack of control around you. There's something that has triggered you to feel a certain way. And it's never about the food. It's never about just diet and exercise, because if it was that easy, we don't need to have all these different products, all these different creatures saying the same shit over and over again, because we can just get a product or a program offline and plug it away. But it's the inner game that matters. And if we're not acknowledging what takes us off track to start with, why we struggle, how can we ever really move forward? So with that, I'm going to let Jared introduce himself and what he's most passionate about in his approach to getting to your dream, quote unquote, body.
Hey, yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. So my name is Jared Hamilton. For those of you that don't know, I'm 30 years old. I'm from the Midwest, here in the States. And my biggest thing when it comes to like this whole weight loss game is there's an adage that I use and that I say a lot. As I say this, it goes, outer work without inner work doesn't work. Because at the end of the day, like you have like outer work, like workouts, nutrition, and that kind of stuff. But if you don't have inner work, like connecting deeper to yourself, holding space for your emotions, learning to sit with your inner darkness, and taking care of your headspace and emotional state, well, that stuff doesn't work, because most people's desires for weight loss are in most cases rooted in darkness. Like I was treated this way when I was little, or my mom said this, or I was taught this about food, or whatever the case is. But what people struggle with most in the world of weight loss, to be honest, has nothing to do with the weight loss itself, but it's only triggered by weight loss. So it makes this thing a little bit more complex. Like, for example, if someone struggles with binge eating or emotional eating, or they have relationship with food issues, well, I can't just say, work harder, count calories more, take away your carbs, do more workouts. Like that doesn't touch the problem. But the issues with your food relationships only get triggered when you go to lose weight. So that's why we have to approach this game differently. It's what I call dieting from the inside out. Is that's what we have to do. We have to approach this from an entirely different inner game perspective, still in the container of weight loss, if we want to call it that, but it has to still be addressed. And in a lot of cases, maybe put the brakes on in terms of fat loss right out the gate, get this inner foundation fixed. And then all of a sudden weight loss doesn't struggle so much.
I'm going to go on a completely different route than what I actually intended now. Throwing another diet at an emotional problem, at an inner game problem, isn't going to make the problem any better. Going
Nope.
harder at something that's already dysfunctional is only enhancing something that is dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. So something you said just made me think of, there are people that are addicted to, well, not really addicted, but it's like their coping mechanism is reverting to this dieting identity, or they can't let go of this dieting identity because it's all they've known. So maybe you can talk a little bit on that and letting go of that, I guess, what we're so used to, because it's so, like, if you've been dieting your whole life, if you've been struggling your whole life, if all you have is this fear of, I always struggle, whatever the inner game is, how can you possibly see a brighter future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, without a doubt. You have to, this is what we call unlearning. Like in so many cases, like this is why sabotage is so prevalent, is because the idea of unconscious sabotage is rooted in your unconscious programs. But how can you escape a jail you don't know you're trapped inside of? If you don't know these these things are running rampant underneath the surface, you can't stop it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know my car needs to go to the mechanic if I can't hear the engine pinging, right? It's the same thing. Most people are so in their shit and so close to this where they don't realize what's happening until it's too late, until they've gained the weight back, until the problems are really, really bad. So that's why so much of this game is we have to unlearn the old conditioning that we did learn. Like, and that's the hard truth, is most people's conditioning is like they've been dieting for decades, right? How many people listening have been like on the yo-yo diet for years, or they've been trying to lose weight longer than they've actually been successful? Well, the issue is your brain unconsciously is now addicted to to that struggle, to that identity. Like, and that's where it gets really, really dangerous, because psychology teaches us that the mind and our nervous system crave familiarity, right? It's just basic psychology. We crave what's most familiar. So if you're most familiar with diet culture, food issues, struggle, suffering, falling off the wagon every weekend, whatever the case is, if sabotage, if that's what your familiar is, it's no wonder once you get a couple weeks into the positive, something always happens. You always fall off. You always, like, something always happens and you always end up back to where you started, is because we're too familiar with struggle and suffering. And so that's why most people never get out of it. That's why we have to create what I call a new familiar. We have to rewrite these unconscious programs.
New familiar. Maybe you can talk a little bit on what exactly the reticular activating system is and how we can use that to develop this new familiar, because people think it's woo woo. Like, I try to get my girls to do this woo woo work, but it's not tangible. It's not something that's going to lead to, hey, I'm getting results straight away. I feel it.
Absolutely. Well, this is why, like, we have this, like, what we call like the intangibles, right? Like that's a hard thing. Is losing 10 pounds, that's tangible. Lifting, let's say 100 kilos, that's tangible. But like fixing your relationship with food and fixing your reticular activating system, and like that, those are very intangible things. So but they're so important. This is why we have to do what I call tangibilize the intangible. But here's how we do that. This is why, like, I'm really glad you brought up the RAS. So for those listening that aren't familiar, the RAS stands for your reticular activating system. Here's the thing. Next time someone thinks it's woo-woo, Google RAS, or reticular activating system, and hit images, and it will show an organ about this big that sits at your brain stem. It's part of your brain. It's literally an actual organ, and its sole role is to filter your life. So a couple non-weight loss analogies of how your RAS works. So most people listening to this, you bought a car. Like, you bought a car, let's say it was a white van, right? That's what you drive. You've drove that forever. Then all of a sudden, I would bet you see white vans a lot. You probably see them like everywhere. But then let's say you sell the white van and then you buy a blue car. Well, all of a sudden, it's no wonder you start to see blue cars everywhere now. It's not that there's any more or any less cars on the road, or the blue cars on the road. It's that they're now in your awareness. So it's the same thing here in the world of weight loss. Or it's like the same thing like with your kid. If all of a sudden, if you're a parent listening to this and you're at like a theme park, you can hear your baby say "mom" in spite of a ton of other kids screaming their faces off. But because that's your baby, your reticular activating system goes, "Oh, that's my baby yelling." It's the same thing. So why that matters here in weight loss is this is why we're gravitated to what's most familiar. So when it comes to this, if you're only familiar with pain, suffering, how much your situation sucks, what you do is never good enough, it's no wonder your brain unconsciously finds reasons to validate those thoughts and experiences. This is why, like, how many people listening to this, that you guys that are listening, how many times have you like lost, let's say that you went down a couple inches, but the scale hasn't dropped, and you go, instead of being excited that you lost a couple inches or that your clothes are fitting better, your face is thinning out, you go, "Oh, but I haven't lost any weight yet." It's case in point. You literally have progress proving you in the face right now, but you're disregarding it and looking at the one thing that you're taking out of context, which would be the bathroom scale. It's the same thing. It goes back to that, because you have, when it comes to your RAS, it goes back to what you're feeding. Are you feeding the things that serve you, or feeding the things that aren't? And because that's going to slowly change your filter on life. It's where it's really dangerous, where it's why two people could go through the exact same day, have the exact same results, but one person will see them and experience them and the other will stay in suffering. It's dangerous as fuck.
I actually spoke on something really funny the other day where I was like, we can have two people in the exact same place having completely different experiences because their lens on their surroundings is conditioned by their upbringing, by their past, by their beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone doesn't like being around people, so they think everyone's judging them, whereas the other one's waving at everybody and having fun and having a life. And it's funny that you brought up the cars, because I had to buy a new car last year, and it was a white SUV. And it wasn't up until I needed to buy this white SUV that I'm like, holy freaking shit. There are white SUVs everywhere. And I never noticed it up until then. And then there's the other one where there's what you're focusing on is what you see most of. Like, there's that clip where there's the guy in the gorilla suit, and
Yes, I love that. I love it.
you're trying to count how many passes with the ball or whatever it is, and then at the end they're like, "Did you see the guy with the gorilla suit?" And you never see the guy with the gorilla suit, because all you're focusing on is how many passes of the basketball.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I was just going to say that kind of leaks into what you said about people believing everything they think.
Mm-hmm. The whole concept is like, I was on a podcast the other day, and the gentleman asked me, he goes, what's one of the biggest like issues that you see most people struggling to lose weight go through? And it wasn't they're eating too much. It was they believe everything they think and feel. Most people assume just because they thought it or felt it means it's true. But you have to understand, like what we talked about a few minutes ago, your brain does not give it, like your brain is all about self-preservation. Your brain does not give a fuck if you're happy. It's only about self-preservation because it's used to the familiar. So that's where it gets into trouble, because it doesn't think the thoughts and the ideas of what's going to make you happy. It's what will keep you in familiarity, because at least it's predictable. We might not die. So what I mean by that is, let's say you've always been overweight. Let's say you've always struggled with your weight, but you're 2 weeks into, let's say you're 2, 3, 4 weeks into working with Ruby, and you're losing weight, feeling great, inches are coming off, pants are fitting better. And then all of a sudden the scale spikes though. But like that's just normal, right? But your old conditioning is you've always struggled. So you might go, oh, I'm not making any progress. So you then all of a sudden believe that to be true, even though you're making progress with Ruby. It's the same thing here, where like here's an analogy I always like to give. And I'm assuming a lot of your listeners have kids like at home and stuff. So imagine how chaotic your life would be. I'm talking to the people that you guys that are listening. Imagine how chaotic your life would be if everything your child said or thought you had to make true. They're like, mommy, you're stupid. It's like, okay, mommy is stupid. Or mommy, sissy hit me and she never hit the other kid. And it's like, oh, yep, sissy said you hit her, so it must be true. Or mommy, I want to quit school because it's stupid. You're like, okay, you can quit school because it's stupid. Like, life would be chaotic as fuck if you as a parent said that everything your child thought or felt had to be true. Well, your brain's no different. You have an inner child. And if you just assume everything you think and feel is just blatant truth, you're in for a very chaotic, hellacious life. Like, so many people feel like they're a lost cause, so they are actually convinced they're a lost cause. Or so many people think and feel like they should be further ahead, so they actually are convinced they should be further ahead when it's not true. Or so many people think their worthiness or they're worthless or they're not deserving of happiness, so they're fully convinced they are not supposed to be happy. But just because you think it, just because you feel it, doesn't mean it's true. It's like a child, and it needs to be corrected.
There are two things I want to bring up there. The first one is that there was, like, this actually happens all the time. And this happened with me when I signed up with my coach years ago. And there's something wrong with me. There's going to be a lot of issues with me. I'm going to have to fill you in on everything. I'm going to have to write you a whole list of all these different things. And I'm probably going to have a heap of different issues coming up. And this was my client to me. And I'm like, no. You just need to slow down and trust the process and not think, not do anything except go through the process and tune into your body. I don't want you to think about asking questions until you're a few weeks in. And it's funny, she hasn't even wanted to ask a single thing. She's like, I cannot believe how much better I feel. Like, my kids are noticing it. They're so much more resilient. And I'm like, they're getting that off you because now they're seeing their mom change. And the other one is, I saw someone comment on Lane Norton's post about quick fixes. And he said on the comment, the reason I went to quick fixes is because I didn't have any self-worth and I didn't believe that I could stick to something for longer than 30 days. So I thought the quick fix was the easiest way out. And I'm just like, wow, I understand now. So maybe you can think of somewhere where you've seen that in actuality, because I'm sure so many people Go with that, because life is so chaotic. Life is so chaotic.
Mhm.
So I just want to get this over and done with, and then I can return to chaotic life. That's
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Well, here's the thing on that is um a lot of people feel like that because they have like he's right. A lot of people have a really no confidence or so little self-worth. So they know they won't make it. So they try to do stupid shit and quick fixes till to get to the result and as fast as possible. The problem is there's two things. Number one is if the avenue is unsustainable, the results will be unsustainable. This is why we have to fix the relationship with you first, right? This is why this is not just a weight loss problem. It furthers the point. This is a you to you issue. We have to fix the relationship you have with yourself. And here's the best way to do that. It's just like a relationship with another person. Like my wife, for example, should be able to tell that I love her in more than just my words, right? Like most people listening to this would agree that my wife should be able to tell that I love her in my actions, right? If someone can only tell you love them in their words and your actions are shitty, then we all would agree they don't love you or appreciate you or whatever the case is. So here's the thing, it's no different with the relationship that you have with yourself. The epitome of self-love is showing up for yourself when you don't like yourself. Self-love is not bubble baths and bath bombs and affirmations and all that. Self-love is hating yourself but choosing to show up for yourself anyway. Choosing, like, yeah, I know I want to do the quick fixes, but I know that's not good for me, so I'm going to go the slow sustainable route anyway, right? This is why I always say take pride in showing up for yourself, especially when you don't want to. But because what this does is people go, well, then how do I teach myself to love myself? It's you saying I love myself, but have shitty actions is never going to fix the problem. How would I show I love like let's say my wife and I had an issue and she didn't think I loved her. Well, I would have to show that in my actions, right? So it's the same thing with your relationship with you. To fix your relationship with you is you have to start having a good track record and good integrity with yourself. As in, you may not be motivated, but you show up for yourself anyway. You may not feel like doing your inner work, but you do it anyway. You may not feel like eating right, but you eat right anyway. You do this because you love yourself to prove to yourself you're worth it, not because you hate yourself and you're an unworthy piece of shit.
If you don't love yourself on the way there, you're never gonna find love in the destination. And
Mm-hmm.
something really powerful in that is that you don't know how good you can feel until you feel good. And until you have a track record of doing those very things, you start to prove yourself that you can do it and you start to feel better for it.
Yep.
And I guess this can be where it's like, oh, this is the unknown. Now what? I can't keep this up. And that's probably where a lot of people self sabotage, because it's like, this is going really well. But then people don't actually, you said, take pride in showing up for yourself. People are too busy saying, I'm not there yet. Or they're too busy still beating themselves up for what they're not. So they self sabotage and they don't celebrate their wins because I'm still not there yet. I'm still shit,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that is. And that feeds into what I wanted to introduce us with is people don't slow down enough to even start making progress, because we think thrashing about and doing whatever the fuck is going to make better progress than slowing down and sharpening the axe. So you only need one hit, not a million.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Actually, to be honest, it's why in my giant tree tattoo, I have an axe, like literally, like right here, like on it for that exact reason. So it's one of those things though, like you have, this is why there's a concept I teach, I call it being present in fat loss. Whereas the magic happens in, it sounds airy fairy, but it's true where the magic happens in the world of weight loss in the present moment. Because if you think about all the times you go south, this is like when Ruby said, you need to slow down and that's basically slowing down so you can be present right now. When you're like freaking out about the unknown, it's because you're worried. You're looking into the future about what's bad's going to happen. So then you're not here right now. Or if you're looking into the past, you're like, oh, I've always struggled. I've always struggled with my weight. Well, that's in the past. You're not in the present moment now. What is now? When you're in the moment now, you only have one or two problems to solve, not a dozen problems to solve. When you're in the moment now, you're all about your actions. Like, okay, just right now today, what do I need to do to move forward? Okay, I only have one or two things to do to move forward then. But if you're looking into the future and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting overwhelmed, I'm trying to do too many things, because now you're panicking. You're like, well, what if I don't make it? What if I fail? What if this doesn't work out? XYZ, then that's where we go south versus so many answers to the problems that you're having is in the present moment right now, which means you need to slow down. You need to get reflective. You need to be self-aware because it's also one of those things where I learned this from a guy, his name's Dr. Joe Dispenza. Joe talks about you cannot be in survival and open to like receiving on a much higher level. Because if you're like panicking, like trying to do a million things and you're looking to the future, the reason you're not cool with, the reason you don't like the unknown is because you're in survival, right? You're like, oh, I want to get back to the known. Well, the known is suffering and struggle and chaos. So the known is not where you want to be. All the magic is in the unknown. This is why when you're like, oh my gosh, I'm out in the unknown, I don't know what to do, like that's the best place to be, because your addiction to the known is what's sabotaging you, because the only thing you know is struggle and suffering. This is why part of it is getting familiar and being okay with being in the quote unquote unknown, because that's where all the magic happens. But if you're in the survival state of, oh my gosh, I might get my way back, I'm gonna freak out, and you're not open to like losing some weight. You're not open to like seeing progress. You're living in the state of like, I hope the tiger doesn't get me. And those two worlds never coexist.
Play to win, don't play to not lose. But
Mm-hmm.
there is something that I say a lot, which is you can't Google Maps your way there. Like you can't pick up the human and plot the human there and just get there. Like you're growing in the process. And this is the value of having a coach, having support, maybe working in combination with a coach and therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, you actually become the person in the process. It's not like you're just taking the outside of you, getting there, and you leaving the past behind. Like you learn these things along the way. And if you do it the right way, you don't need to worry about all that future shit. And
Right.
like something I realized is that overwhelm comes when one, you don't leave space for your emotions, which I'll get you to talk about. And number two is where there are no action steps in place, there are no priorities. All you're thinking about is all that there needs to be done to get there without just focusing on what do I need to do right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next step. And just those two steps that you need to focus on. Because how the hell can you get to an outcome if you don't do the process? I mean, how do you bake a cake without ingredients?
Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is the issue is where most people go south is they're too outcome focused. Everything they're doing is every day they're like, have I lost weight yet? Hey, have I achieved the thing yet? But the issue is if you're purely outcome focused, you can't control outcomes. Even as a coach, we cannot control how fast someone lose weight, where they lose the weight from, how quickly or how slow progress is going to be. We can't control the outcome. But at the end of the day, what we can control is actions. But ironically, actions cause outcomes. So if you're purely focused on the outcome, we can't control that. The only thing that we can control is our actions. But then actions always lead to outcomes. So this is why we need to not be outcome focused and we need to be action focused. And it fixes everything.
Yeah, I feel like as well in those set actions that a lot of people just want to start that journey now to fast track their way there, but they don't prep themselves for it. Like, even if you have been physically doing the things to have you ready to do like a fat loss phase,
Yep.
if you've been mentally in such a shitty state your whole life, you're not in a place to go down that route because
Right.
you're going to self-sabotage that. You're going to make the process more painful than it needs to be,
Mm-hmm.
which is why you need to be patient in the process. But the biggest issue people want, like people want results now. They're not willing to shift their mindset with it. And this is where I reckon you can bring in why journaling, why sitting with yourself is so important if you want to start making the changes without self-sabotaging your way back.
So I always say this is like most people would agree, hopefully by listening to this point in the podcast, where your biggest issues it's a you to you thing. Like these issues are deep inside you, that it's we can't fix it with more weight loss. So here's the thing. If you can't sit with yourself, how do you expect to overcome yourself? If if Ruby and I have an issue, like we're beefing and we have an issue with each other, how can we resolve it if we're running away from each other? Right? If you and your partner are fighting, you can't resolve that without talking to each other and being with each other. So when you have these bigger issues like sabotage or food relationships or whatever the case is, if you can't sit with yourself and either do different journal techniques or sit in silence with yourself and be okay with feeling these negative emotions, then how do you expect to overcome them? This is why it's so important to have like I said in the beginning, in or outer work without inner work doesn't work. This is the inner work. If you want to really get on the other side of your sabotage, your food relationships, your emotional eating, and all these things that's you know what to do but don't do it, your consistency problems, all of that shit, you have to get really good at holding space for your darkness, which is when we implement things like journaling or meditating and things like that.
something super powerful there, because like I'm freaking 7 years into this thing, and it's me real like it's not even coming up about my physical now. This is like showing itself in other areas, like business, for example. But it's like you will always still have things popping up in your journey. Things are always going to challenge you. It's not like all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
daisies and tulips and sunflowers. Like the more resilient you become, someone said this, I don't know who said it, but you don't just go over the process, or you don't just get over it. You need to go through it. And you
Yep.
mentioned this with the argument thing. It's like, yeah, but you also won't solve it by yelling over each other. And I guess
Mm-hmm.
where it comes to actually slowing down, being able to listen. And I know a client that's just started a couple of months in, but just started making the most progress in just 1 week because she sat with herself. And I think it was something I said where, but the issue with your husband isn't the issue with your husband. It's not the relationship with him. It's the fact
Mm-hmm.
you don't even have a relationship with yourself. And every time we try to look at the relationship with yourself, you start bringing up husband issues again. I don't want to
Yep.
hear about him. I want to hear about your relationship with you. And
Mm-hmm.
since she stopped bringing up him and only brought up her progress is phenomenal in just two
Right.
2 weeks into that. And this goes into the listening versus hearing. It's we do it to other people, but we do it to ourselves the most. We listen, but wait, we hear, but we don't truly listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Like at the end of the day, most people who are struggling with all this stuff, they haven't ever sat and like listened to hear what their brain's trying to say. It's like when people first tell me, like when they're like meditating, they're like, "Oh, Jared, well, my mind kept wandering." I'm like, maybe you should just listen to it. Maybe you should just let it wander. Because again, how do you expect to like again, if like let's say my wife and I are having an issue in our marriage and she needs to communicate how I made her feel, but if I don't let her talk and I don't listen to her, how are we going to resolve that? Like this is my biggest thing is um too often like most people don't believe we have an inner child. Like we all like psychology 101, we all have an inner child. So but what happens when a normal child isn't seen, heard, and is ignored? Like if you have a child, like for those of you listening that have an actual kid at home, what happens when that child is not seen, they're not heard, and they're ignored? I bet they act out. I bet they go get mom's attention, those kind of things. Well, if you have an inner child and you aren't and like you have all this inner darkness that's not being seen or heard and it's ignored, it's no wonder you're sabotaging. It's no wonder you're not happy. It's no wonder you're not motivated. It's no wonder you're not consistent, because it's quote unquote acting out. This is why how to fix that is you literally just sit in silence and listen and let whatever comes up and hold space for it. That's how we do that.
And it might take months. It most likely will take months. And this is why patience is so important. And you don't just use a coach for weight loss for this very reason, because there's stuff that is going to pop up. There's stuff that you're going to need to work through along the way. But if you're only signing up to get this amazing after photo, you're going to keep finding yourself back to not only the before, but the before plus some. And
Mm-hmm.
like I even used to do this myself as an example, where I always used to cling to competitions and end dates because I didn't believe I could stick to something unless I had an end date and something to keep me accountable. Because I already committed to this thing, I already paid for this thing. I can't not do it now. But that just led to me burning myself out in worse ways, and that's what people do with these 12-week challenges. And I guess this also comes up with the whole, oh, I'm training my ass off and my belly fat still isn't going. And it's like, I've been doing this for years. I was just hoping to see some results now. Maybe you can talk on that mindset, because that is still a fixed mindset.
Along the lines of like just not being patient enough.
Yeah. And because they're like, I've been doing this for years. And then they think just because they start something new, all of a sudden it's going to fix itself.
I think a lot of people just need to have an understanding of what actual expectations look like. Like, because that's the thing is, if I was promised one thing and I got a different thing, or I didn't get the thing, then I'd be pissed too. So part of this game um, is really getting your expectations aligned. Like understanding that like there's a gestation period to everything. It doesn't matter if you've been doing this for years. You start something now, it's not going to happen for months and months and months and months and months. Like even like in the world of fat loss, like I always say, fat loss is like pregnancy. Nothing cool happens till about 9 months down the road. You know what I mean? But even like if you look at something like pregnancy, like someone could be pregnant for 3 months and not be showing. That doesn't mean that little fucker's not going to come out in 9 months. You know what I mean? It's not linear like that. It's not how the game goes. It's one of those things where at the end of the day, this has to be within context and in things like that. Just getting expectations in check.
I love that analogy. It that's actually a really good one. I guess, how does this fall into the whole, like, the whole downfall of focusing on just a weight loss goal, and we're developing a new routine? How can, I guess this is looking for practical applications, where can we fit this woo woo stuff in so it's not so woo woo anymore? And how can that kind of take away the downfall of, that made no sense, but take away the sting of just focusing on the outcome, because now they're developing a new way of being.
I would say we have to change your perspective. Number one is understand it's not woo woo. It's tactical as fuck. If you're implementing these things, it's because your situation probably sucks. It's probably because you're emotional eating or you're sabotaging your results and stuff like that. So part of it is being open and coachable to try the stuff that people, like Ruby and I are talking about, right? So that's number one. Number two is in terms of how to apply it. The best thing to do is we need to make it where it's seamless. At the end of the day, if you have habits you're not used to doing or good at, we have to make it where they're not that big deal to integrate into your normal daily life. So for example, one of my favorite things to do with stuff like this is we tie it to a habit you're already crushing at. Like most people listening to this probably brush their teeth consistently. So what would happen if you just journaled right before you brush your teeth for 5 minutes? Done. What if when you had your coffee in your morning, instead of scrolling social media when you're having your coffee in the morning, why don't you just sit in silence and sip on your coffee, right? Why don't, instead of if you go on a walk every day and you listen to music, why don't you walk in silence? Part of this game is integrating these things in your life seamlessly where it's not that big of a deal, because they're hard enough to do on your own when it's uncomfortable, but let alone it being complex or not sustainable and from a habit standpoint makes things even more difficult. So that's why at the end of the day, one of the best things to do is tie these really new habits with habits you're already really good at, like brushing your teeth, like taking your contacts out at nighttime, like eating lunch, like whatever your stuff is that you do, just tying it with those where it's like a buddy. And that way it's pretty seamless.
Something that I hear a lot is, I don't know how to journal. Where do I start? I don't know how to write on this stuff.
Easy.
What do I even write on? So what would you say to those remarks?
The only prompt you need in the world of journaling is answering this question as if you're talking to a friend. What do I feel right now? That is it. You don't need a journal about your day. You don't need a journal about like your routine. You don't need a journal affirmations. Don't need to be positive. Just as basically the way that I like to teach journaling is you're just doing an emotional dump. You're just journaling like you're talking to a friend. That's it. You're literally like if your best, like think about if you had the worst day ever and you're telling your best friend about it. That's all you're doing. You're literally just writing down, well, I feel a little anxious and I'm not sure why. I guess today's been kind of weird, but now that I think about it, now I'm feeling a little bit sad. But then, you know what? I'm a little overwhelmed because I got a lot to do today. Like you're just doing an emotional dump, answering the question, what do I feel? As if you're talking to a friend. That is it. It's no more complicated than that. Just get a junky notebook and just start writing. That's literally it.
There's something that I feel needs to have some airspace, and that's the whole just be positive. Because I feel like people try to turn negative emotions positive all the time without actually letting the negative emotions go for a ride in the bus so that you can become familiar with them. So then they keep showing up.
We don't want to suppress we don't want to suppress the negative, right? Like there's a difference between like living and living in a negative life and being cynical and just like a downer piece of shit. Like that's not what we're doing. We need to hold space for the darkness, right? Like imagine this. This is how I want you to treat it. If your child had you're listening, if your kid's dog got hit by a car, it's really sad. They're overwhelmed. They're sad that their best buddy died. And they come to you, they're like, Mom, Rover died. I'm so sad. Are you going to tell them to like not be sad or tell them to just be positive? Of course not. You're going to let them cry in your arms. You're going to hold space for them. You're going to let them feel the negative emotions. It's the same thing for us as adults. there's a difference between being negative and just bitching and gossiping and whining about stuff versus if you're sad, allow yourself to be sad. Like hold space for it, right? If you're feeling anxious, allow yourself to feel the anxiety. If you're feeling overwhelmed, allow yourself to feel the overwhelm. It's not helpful. It's like, to be honest, when you run away from this inner darkness and your negative emotions, that's when like it's like it chases you, right? It's like I always word it, it's like a dog. If you run from a dog, it's going to chase you. It's got more endurance than you do. But what happens when you quit running from a dog? It it might jump on you, but then you're boring and it goes and finds something else to chase. It's the same thing with your negative emotions. You're not just being a negative person. You're just honoring those negative emotions just like you would anyone else.
Something that I feel comes up with a lot of people is, I guess, the identity piece. And you aren't who you think you are, and you aren't who others think you are. You are who you think others think you are. And people go around trying to hold up this identity, and they try to live up to it, which doesn't allow them to actually just be. And I guess this fits into probably one of the biggest issues even you deal with, which is perfectionism, needing to do everything
Mhm.
right all the time. And I'm seeing it way too much. Maybe you can give some practical advice, some tips, some insight into how to break through that.
Yeah, well, the thing with perfectionism or like an all or nothing kind of mentality is, I'll put it this way: a mentor of mine said perfectionism is the laziest of all standards because it's the one standard you know you can't reach. So like at the end of the day, if you're like, I'm a perfectionist, it's like you're literally like the only standard you're setting is one that's impossible because you're a human. So that's not cool. But then number two is your life doesn't operate that way. You're not a perfectionist. It's like when someone tells me they're a perfectionist, I'm like, okay, um, give me an example outside outside of weight loss that you're a perfectionist, like with your kids, with school, with whatever, and you can't. Like it's one of those things. Like you're not. Your house is never perfectly clean. Your kids are never perfect. You give grace for people who don't deserve it. Like it's one of those kind of things. So it makes no sense to play the perfectionist card when you're here in the world of weight loss. That just doesn't make sense. So it's not even practical because you're not a perfectionist. The sad truth is when someone says they're a perfectionist in the world of weight loss is to validate their bad behavior when they aren't consistent. Well, I'm a perfectionist, so it's validating. Like, imagine that. Imagine if I beat my wife and I said, oh, it's fine. I'm a perfectionist. She should have made me dinner. Like, that's not cool. So it's not cool when you do it to validate your bad behavior. You see what I mean?
That is, wow, that is a really powerful insight, because that's feeding back to the lack of belief in yourself. So you cling to this perfectionism because, hey, it's the easiest way out. I know I can easily take the get out of jail free card because I'm a perfectionist. If I can't do it perfect, then I only
Sure.
put myself up to these standards. And this goes, it's funny because I realized this when I was doing my own digging, where at school, I would always say, I don't study. Why would I study? And then I used to try to make it look like and play around with things in a way that I wasn't studying, because
Sure.
I didn't want to get a shitty result. Because if I got like a shitty result, then, oh, you just spent your whole life studying and you got a shitty result. Boo you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have to take responsibility for our actions and not validate it with like an old identity that doesn't serve us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I guess to tie this up, the biggest secret to success, and it's something you put up a video on, the biggest secret to success is consistency. And everything we've spoken about is what hinders consistency.
Hmm.
And not only consistency, but actually having a clear vision on where you want to go that isn't based on
Sure.
isn't based on past predicaments and things that you feel like you need to do, or things to move you away from pain. So maybe you can talk about what consistency means and what actually hinders it, and then kind of tie it up with how you would apply this to different personalities.
At the end of the day, like it's not one of those things that would differ for different personalities. There's like every human's different, right? So at the end of the day, we have to look at this through the lens of like what can I honest to God be consistent with in terms of what's practical. Too often we look at the world of like most fitness coaches like, oh, just be more consistent, but it's like that's not very helpful. We all know we have to be consistent, but then like at the end of the day, what makes something consistent? And there's really two ways that I like to look at consistency in an action. Because when we say you need to be consistent, we're always talking like in an action, right? So at the end of the day, when it comes to the consistency side of things, there's really two realms that I like to look at. What, number one, has the greatest ROI, the return on investment, and what has the least amount of friction. Like if you look at like a Venn diagram with like two circles, like one circle is what has the greatest ROI, what actions have the greatest outcomes in return on investment. But then what other actions have the least amount of friction to do, right? If you told me to just eat a little bit less, that's not a big deal. But if you told me to get rid of carbs and go run for 30 minutes every day, I would not do that because that's a lot of friction. So when it comes to this, the question is what has the biggest ROI and what has the least amount of friction? And then that is what, then we pick one or two of those things and be consistent with. Because when people are not consistent, it's usually they're trying to do things that are not sustainable. They're doing too many things and they're trying to change too big of things at once.
Something that just sparked is how, like, developing patience and enjoying the journey. Because if you're not patient in the journey and you're not enjoying it, you're not going to get the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. Like at the end of the day, you have to be patient with the journey. Otherwise, it's never going to happen. Like we don't live in a world where we get something for nothing. Everything comes down to we have to put something in, and then a gestation period happens, like where like the process is going to happen. Then we get the outcome. We don't plant a flower and then expect it to be up the next day. We know we have to put it in the ground, do the actions, water it, give it sunlight, keep it, make sure no animals eat it, but then give it time of those things, then we get the outcome. Again, it goes back to not being action based and I'm sorry, not being outcome based and being action based.
I love that. And I guess that sums it up perfectly, because if honestly, if all you're doing is trying to achieve outcomes without actually putting in the process steps, you're thrashing around trying to grasp straws that are never going to actually take root. So with all that being said, take time for you. And I'm going to let Jared give 3 of his biggest tips and one tip that helped you get to where you are now, mindset wise, that has made you more resilient through your journey.
Number one is realize you don't have to earn worthiness. You're worthy because of just being who you are right now. You don't have to earn the idea of being worthy or deserving of what you want. That's number one. Number two is learn to sit with your inner darkness and hold space for it and love it like you'd love a child. If you had a son or daughter who was going through a rough period in time, let's say they were like terrible at school, you would not hate them or treat them negatively just because they're struggling with school. So just because you're struggling with weight loss or your inner game doesn't mean you need to look at yourself in a different light or treat yourself differently. That'd be number two. And the number three is don't be so quick to believe everything that you think and feel. Honor it and hold space for it, number one, but don't believe every single thing, number two.
I love that. And what do you feel has made you most resilient?
All of it. The biggest thing that stemmed my journey was the first two, was realizing that I don't have to earn being worthy or deserving of what I want. I thought I had to earn it. But if you base your happiness and worthiness outside of you, you'll never find it. So that was the first one. And then allowing myself to love my inner darkness and hold space for it instead of running from it. Those are the two of the biggest ones for me.
I love that. With that, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course.
I'm going to leave your Insta handle below. Is there anything else that you want me to leave below?
I would just say, like, if your listeners are into this kind of content, I have my podcast. It's called Dieting from the Inside Out, and it's literally like it's nothing but this kind of stuff. This a little bit deeper level, super deep stuff that changes everything. So I would just say, otherwise, if you guys like this kind of content, check my podcast out. It's called Dieting from the Inside Out.
I'm going to leave that name in the show notes below, because I feel like
Cool.
It's the most important part of the piece. Like you can't get the outside without the inside. Like,
yeah,
they need to work together.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. If you liked this podcast, please reach out to me and let me know what's sung with you, because the messages I get from all of you girls that listen to this that have resonated with something and have changed something because of something we spoke about, it honestly fills my heart with so much joy. So let me know, let Jared know, go follow him, go listen to his podcast, and start doing what you do from the inside out, and you'll start to flourish, because no seeds flourish if you aren't plucking out the weeds and you aren't actually tending to your harvest. So Thank you for that. And I will see you on the next podcast.